What's going on, guys, and welcome to my review of The Passenger. This is a movie that is going straight to video on demand on the 4th, so if you're interested in it, please check it out. This review is going to be a couple of days early. I did check out a screener of it, and this was released by MGM, but it was also produced by the television banner under Blumhouse. And this is a movie that I didn't really know a whole lot about. I had seen Kyle Gallner on Twitter promoting it a few times. I had seen the poster. It looked intriguing enough, so I reached out to check out a screener and watched this completely blind. Didn't even know anything about what this was going to be about. And essentially the story here is that you have this very shell of a person, this young kid that just kind of fades into the background no matter where he's at, doesn't really take charge of anything in his life, and Kyle Gallner plays one of his coworkers that takes him on a bit of a rampage to bring the man out of him, to kind of bring the life out of this person who, for all intents and purposes, is lifeless. So there's a little aspect of the Hitcher in there. There's a tiny bit of maybe Training Day. I even felt like a little edge of maybe California, the Brad Pitt movie. You know, not full on capturing those concepts, but just little bits of those. So if you like any three of those movies, there's elements here that's probably going to appeal to you. Starting off with the positives, this is definitely the best performance that I've seen Kyle Gallner give. Now, it's been kind of cool to see this guy have a bit of a resurgence over the past year or so. You know, he showed up in Scream 5, he showed up later on in the year in Smile, now he's in this. He was pretty prevalent in horror movies, especially in the 2000s. He was in the Nightmare on Elm Street remake, a few other things. And while he was always good, there was always an aspect to him to where I never was all that enthralled with what he was doing. Like in Nightmare on Elm Street specifically, I always felt like he had this I'm about to break into tears face. And so he's an actor that was good and then just kind of went away for a while. And I never really knew where he went. And here recently, he's been coming back and feels like a totally different actor to me. Like all of the younger aspects to his performances and to his personas that he would bring to these characters, he has gone completely in a different direction, and I'm absolutely here for it because he feels like this seasoned actor now that has much more of a grip of what he wants his career to be, and this is a role that he can really sink his teeth into. This is the type of role that I imagine actors love to play, where they really get to kind of explore the darker elements of what they can bring, because this character of Benson is just very larger than life and violent and wild and crazy, and he gets to go through all these different emotions with his performance. And so this is a really good showcase, if you have not seen what Kyle Gallner has done recently, of what I imagine his career is going to turn into in this later part, where he is now starting to have this resurgence that I'm glad that he's getting. Johnny Birchtold plays the protagonist of the movie, and while I've never seen him before, I don't know if he's done any previous work, he also does a really good job. His character is a little hard for me to get into, to be honest, just because he is so pathetic in a lot of ways, but that's kind of the point. That's kind of the journey that he's going on, is to rise above all of that. But he's really good at staying in this kind of catatonic emotive state throughout most of the film. And when you get into the later half, the third act, where he starts to take charge of things a lot more and starts to have more life to him, you can see the subtle changes in his performance too. So the two leads do a great job at leading this movie, at taking you through the journeys of these two very different characters. Now, there's not a ton of it, but the few little explosions of violence that we get in this movie are really graphic, are really bloody, some really good practical effects, and some of it is kind of surprising, where it just seems like generic blood splatter, and then they kind of return later on and show you how graphic the damage that person just went through, and you're like, oh, that looks fucking painful. And while the movies that I was naming earlier on in this review, I don't feel like this is nearly as good as any of those three, I do like those elements to exploring certain characters. I like kind of people being pushed violently into facing themselves, into facing past traumas and taking charge of their life, and having somebody who is like almost like the devil on their shoulder, just pushing them in the direction that they need to go, whether they want to go that direction or not. There's a lot of appeal to that classic approach that these two characters in this story take. Unfortunately, for all the things that I enjoyed, specifically with the setup of this movie, I felt like the longer it went on, the execution really started to slip for me. Now, this movie kicks off with a bang, literally, and if you're like me and walked in blind, you're like, holy shit, where is this thing about to go? And you get really interested in the possibilities of what is about to happen with these two characters. And most of the runtime, unfortunately, is spent on really mundane things. And I would even go as far as to say a boring exploration of what this is trying to convey with these two characters. Like, there's literally a segment where he forces the main character to go and ask an ex-girlfriend at her job why she broke up with him. And the conversation that they have just adds nothing to the story. It adds nothing to either of the characters. There's no like big reveals or anything that's being uncovered about the main character that's interesting. And so there's like little almost commercial breaks like that in the story to where it just feels like, why are we spending time on this? Like, you started with this huge event, and there's certain things by the end of the movie that seem so relevant to what they're trying to explore, but in between is a lot of meandering. There was also a creative choice that they made with the villainous character of Benson by like the 2/3 mark of the film to try to explain why he is the way that he is without really diving into it too much, and I just felt like that was unnecessary as well. I feel like characters like this, if I'm going to go back to The Hitcher, we'll use that example of John Ryder, they work the best when we know as little about them as possible. They're just a force of nature. They are the way that they are because they're the way that they are. And the fact that the movie actually tried to give some kind of a tragedy, some kind of a very strange, out of nowhere narrative and backstory to this character to give reason to why he is doing the things that he's doing in this story, I just didn't feel like it landed at all. And finally, I just wasn't really all that thrilled with the way that this movie decided to wrap up. I felt like it came together way too cleanly, and it just, some of things about it I don't even think really made a lot of logical sense, especially in that last little chunk, the actual epilogue of the movie. Just things didn't feel realistic to me after the events of what we just watched with these characters. And more than anything else, I just didn't like the way that they wrapped up things with the character of Benson. And it goes along with them introducing that element about 2/3 of the way through the film that I didn't really care for. And from then on, I felt like a different character to me. He was so calm and calculated and in control of what he was trying to do with the main character and what he was trying to push him to be throughout the entire movie, that when you get to the third act and he feels a little bit more like a generic, unhinged character, it just didn't feel satisfying to me when there was so much more potential to do something a lot more non-conventional with that character, or at least a lot more powerful with the way that they wrapped up these two's relationship and this story. So really left me cold in that last 10 to 15 minutes. So overall, guys, if you like kind of slow burn thrillers with a character exploration like this, give it a shot, because it's definitely worth seeing for Kyle Gallner's performance alone. If you're somebody that liked his work in the 2000s, and I've enjoyed seeing him kind of have a comeback here. But beyond that, I felt like the narrative really let those performances down. It just didn't really wrap up or go in the direction by the back half that I felt like was fully satisfying. That's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, please click over here for all of my 2023 new release reviews. I'm also going to put a review up here for Cobweb, which is another kind of lesser known movie that released a couple of weeks ago. You should check out. Like, share, hit that subscribe button if you enjoyed this so you don't miss everything in the future. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.